Hey everybody, I'm Jeff Gluck from SBNation.com. Welcome back to AmpUp88.com, where you come every week to amp up before the race. Just a couple reminders before we get started here. First of all, as you know, there's some cool things about the site. One is that every single day they give away a Dale Jr. autographed item. So Dale Jr. signed a lot of stuff, obviously, then to give one away every day, and so you can win that. There's also an off-the-track video series. This week, the guest on there is engineer Chris Doherty, and he's talking about his job and everything that relates to that. And then TJ Majors, the spotter, his Twitter feed is right on the site, so you can check that out. And obviously we do the chats every week. Next week is going to be Walt Smith, who's a pit crew coordinator for the 5 and 88 team. But this week we have Scott Maxim here. He's the manager of all the engine tuners for Hendrick, and I believe all the Hendrick engines for all the different teams as well. Is that correct?
Yeah. Sprint Cup and the Nationwide Series.
So you have a pretty big job, obviously.
I have a lot of people to work with every week, and a lot of teams to work with. So enjoy it a lot.
Cool. Well, one thing that I like to do for fans that may not know you or be familiar with you, can you talk about how you got here? Not necessarily walk up the stairs and got here in the seat, but how you got to this position.
Well, along the way, really started from, my uncle raced at the local short tracks in Maine and New England, and that was kind of the beginning of an interest in auto racing, and started working for a small machine shop in Maine on engines at an early age. I was early in high school at that time.
Had you always been interested in cars up to then, or?
Yeah, I mean, it was part of the family deal. Recreation would go on the weekends to really all sports, but again, as with my uncle racing, had an interest in the auto racing area for sure. So really kind of grew from there, and then at an early age, I think I was about 17 or 18, I met Ricky Craven at Wiscasset Speedway, a little short track, third-mile short track in Maine. And we struck up an immediate friendship. It was in part, we were two young kids, both racing together, and we worked and raced together. I'd say from that point, really for about the next 15 years.
Wow.
So from there, kind of progressed to where Ricky had an opportunity in the early 90s to own his own team. He invited me to be a part of it, and I was a small part owner of that team in the 94-95 season. And came down here, moved down to North Carolina then. So since then, when Ricky had the opportunity to come to Hendrick Motorsports in '96, I came here with him then with the 25 Budweiser team, and immediately once I got here, I realized this was love the people and the resources that were here, and really just the way that everybody worked together, and the focused goal and direction on a common purpose. And I was like, this is it. I really had no interest in ever going anywhere else.
So the people I'm sure out there may not be familiar with the inner workings of your job and everything. Can you tell us what exactly you do? And don't be modest. Tell us all you do at the track, and what your job duties entail.
Well, on a what would be you'd like to say a good weekend or a normal weekend, hopefully I'm not doing a whole lot. Generally, we've got every team we have has an engine tuner that supports that team, and they will take care of all the routine and really all the basic issues of troubleshooting and tuning and conversations with the drivers and the teams with regard to any power band or small tuning changes that we would make, either for drivability or performance changes, depending on what a driver and team's needs were. I try to fill in the gaps, and help and assist when needed. And when there's problems, that are either mechanical issues, or sometimes you get the occasional either an engine failure or a wrecked car. You've got something that takes place there that you need some extra help. Try to help out in those situations there.
All right, well, let's get some of your questions. Just looking through some of them here. The first one comes from, this is a long name, MCLRNMERCJ. What does that mean? What does all your name mean? You should let me know in the chat. But he or she wants to know, do tuners build the engines per the track, as far as, I guess are the engines built for certain tracks that need more horsepower or torque? Are they designed, do you say, okay, this is a Daytona engine versus a Martinsville engine or whatever?
Yeah, we've got, it's a good question, and we've got, in general, you could separate engines into, we have a Cup Series and Nationwide Series, of which there are distinct differences there, both in the rules as well as how we would design them to build, because of the tracks they run and the rules, gear ratios, and RPM limitations that we have. After that, if we focus more specifically on the Sprint Cup Series, we have restrictor plate engine packages and then open engine packages. The restrictor plate package, being Daytona and Talladega, those tracks are nearly the same, so the package is generally the same as well. If things evolve to where the two tracks, which it is that way a little bit now with the repaving of Talladega, it's quite a bit different than Daytona. But it hasn't gotten to the point where it requires for us a separate engine package for one or the other. When we get into an open package, an open racetracks, we've got short track, basically anything from a mile or under, and then intermediate, anything over that, which is basically anything from Darlington through all your 1.5-mile tracks, and then Michigan, Fontana, Pocono, and Indy, 2-mile and up tracks. Those all take very similar engine packages, anything that's over a mile and up. Then, in addition to that, there's a road course package, which will be somewhat different for Watkins Glen and Sears Point, because those are two very different road course tracks. So that ends up being, I don't know, however many. We don't really count them in that respect, how many we have, but it's probably 6 or 8 different engine packages overall.
Okay. Well, a lot of people out here are asking about the fuel issue last week at Sonoma that we all heard a lot about. I guess on Friday, what had happened, if you guys aren't familiar, somebody put the wrong fuel, or the wrong mixture of fuel, into the 24 and the 88 as well. Is that correct? It was
the only thing that we could be sure of was the 24 car.
Okay.
There was some concern about the 88 with fuel that was in their cans, their dispense cans for putting fuel in during practice. We didn't hear any word back from NASCAR about the 88. I think that was a bit of a false alarm, but at that time there was so much going on in such a short period of time, and we had to be very careful about not only in dealing with NASCAR with the issue, but also making sure that while we were dealing with it with the 24, we had other cars out on the racetrack, and we didn't want to do anything or find anything that could potentially damage the engine. So, we were trying to play it very cautious there.
Well, fan number 88's asking what role you had in the whole thing, and can you kind of give us a behind the scenes of how it all went down? I mean, did somebody come to you guys and say, we put the wrong fuel in, or how did you find it out? And then what, from there on, how does that affect, if it was the wrong fuel, and it obviously was with 24, how does that affect the performance, or how would that have affected an engine?
Well, first off, we know the extent and the concern that NASCAR would have with the wrong fuel in the garage area, period.
As far as a penalty? From
a penalty standpoint, all of that, and we're all very careful and aware of that. We don't have any fuel other than race fuel that we would ever keep on the transporter, because it's just not worth ever taking a chance on. You know, our engine tuner, John Smeltzer, with the 24 team, was near the back of the car when they were putting fuel in the 24 car. And it was a pretty common event, you know, during first practice. You know, the team made a short run, kind of what we would call a race run. You know, it's a bit more of go out for a few laps, car setups a bit more in race trim, and you know, everything was good. Came back in, and they were changing over to make a qualifying run. And in doing that, part of that would be filling the car up with fuel. John was near the back of the car, was getting fueled up. The vent hose that comes out of the fuel cell and goes to the back of the car is clear in color, and he could see that the fuel, which normally has a greenish bluish hue, that the fuel was clear. And he quickly, you know, raised his hand like, hey, we've got a problem here. We involved NASCAR. NASCAR took fuel samples. We pumped the fuel out and went and got fuel, you know, at the fuel pumps, put back in the car. NASCAR later did a couple of fuel samples to just determine, make sure that any residual amount of fuel that was in the fuel cell had been flushed out. And that was important for us as well, because we couldn't take a chance with running the engine on something that we know that there could be fuel that potentially could be a lower octane fuel that could, you know, cause some engine damage. You know, at that point, you know, all the details and all that came out, we didn't really get a lot of information on. We were basically told that we did nothing wrong, and you know, we didn't ask any follow-up questions.
Yeah.
So, you know, from everybody else, we didn't see anything, you know, throughout the rest of our fleet of cars. So, you know, and fortunately the engine never ran, so there was really never a concern for us, you know, with regard to the hurting the engine in any way.
Okay. Well, BeckBeat555 is wondering, will changing to the ethanol gasoline mixture, which is coming up in a few years, or maybe the next couple years, depending on how NASCAR wants to do it, will that affect how you build the engines, or what kind of impact will that have?
It will, and you know, we haven't really gotten into a lot of development yet with an ethanol blend. In part, you know, there's got to be a determination as to what the percentage will be, and we don't know what that percentage will be yet. So we're waiting until we get some more detailed information. But in general, there was a change that we had to make when we go from a leaded fuel, which the lead, as well as adding an inhibitor to detonation or increasing the octane level, it provided some lubricity for valve seat and valve contact, valve face wear. So it was an easy interface there that we had no issues with. Well, as soon as you go to a leaded fuel, that lubricity is now gone, and that interaction of those two surfaces working together would wear much more quickly. Everybody in the series has gone through that, and you work through different materials of valves and seats and different coatings to try to you know, account for that and eliminate that amount of wear. Ethanol will change that again as well, and we would expect that we'll have to go through and you know, find more optimum materials and coatings, but we haven't done anything in that area at this point.
Okay. Quicks99 has a pretty simple question here. How much? What is what is the current cost for a Sprint Cup motor? How much do one of these things cost on average?
Man, you can't buy them. You know, we have you know, our programs are designed around a lease program so that the race team has the use of the engine and our support and everything that we can do to help them through that weekend with technical information and support at the racetrack, support during the week at the shop, and all those things. But you know, when the race is over, we have to get the engine back, and it's that way because it's, you know, it's the resources, the research and development, and all the technical information is in there. So it's not something that we could just that we could sell. If it could be purchased, you know, I don't know what it would cost, but it would be, you know, I would expect you'd be looking at, you know, 50 to, you know, 50,000 plus. Mm-hmm. You know, and relative to other engines that are out there that you can purchase, you know, I think we're all pretty proud of the product that we have, you know, and the work that goes into it. So, you know, we wouldn't want to give them away, that's for sure.
So Quicks 99 would need to save up a lot of money probably if he was going to try to get one on the market sometime. Sorry, Quicks 99. Crazy 88s wants to know, what is the approximate horsepower of today's Sprint Cup engine?
Today's engines will be, and I'll talk, you know, across the field, you know, we're probably looking at an area of 820 to 875 horsepower throughout the field as maximum power, and you know, from a torque and a lower RPM power standpoint, the range is probably in the area of like 500 to 550 foot-pounds of torque. You know, for 358 cubic inches, naturally aspirated, carbureted now on gasoline, that's, you know, when you look across industry there, it's pretty impressive power numbers really for the size of the engine.
Jay Palm Jr. is wondering, and you may have to rephrase this with the right terminology and stuff, but he says, Scott, do the tuners know what team an engine is slated for while working on them? I guess maybe more the builders, as far as when somebody's building an engine, are they like, okay, this one's going to 48, this one's going to Phoenix Racing, or whatever, you know, whatever it may be?
Yep. You know, as an engine goes through our shop, it's not built for a particular team at that point. It's an engine going together. Generally, we have them built for an event. So given what we're talking about right now, we've got engines that are going through the shop that are that'll be for Chicago.
That's pretty far out.
It is.
You go pretty far in advance.
Well, we have, you know, if we look at our schedule, we've got Daytona next week. Teams need their engines this week to be able to get the cars prepared. So those engines really had to be done late last week or early this week. Mm-hmm. So the next race in line is Chicago, and those engines will actually start to run on the dyno probably later this week. So they go through, you know, relative to the schedule, and then we run them and we distribute them to the teams from there. We have 8 to 10 engine builders between our nationwide and our Cup program, and we just try to evenly distribute, you know, to a certain degree, try to distribute the engines. You know, the builders, they'll end up in all the different cars really throughout the year. It's a lot easier for us to manage by building a consistent engine week in and week out, by running it through the shop in that manner, instead of having an individual putting an engine together for an individual team. It's a lot easier for us to make changes and updates, and we can look at our schedule and we can say we have this improvement, whether it be performance or durability, and we can we can schedule it for this particular race, and then it goes through the shop that way, and the engine builders, you know, start to receive the parts that way, and they can put it together. So it works a lot better for us from a consistency standpoint.
By the way, I totally blew it by saying that we were halfway through about 5 minutes ago, but we've passed the halfway point. And this is Scott Maxim. He's the manager of all the engine tuners for Hendrick. So keep the questions coming. We're still looking for some more good ones. And by the way, you had said earlier before we sat down that you drink a lot of the sugar-free AMP. I know the AMP people that are watching probably would like to hear that. So that's probably a good thing.
You know, during the race, you know, you just always, you know, we've got a lot of different times. You know, we're at the track. Sometimes you're up early in the morning, and there can be long days. So yeah, we amp it up quite a bit at the track as well.
Speaking of motors that aren't amped up anymore, the old motors, Quicks 99, who wanted to buy one earlier, I think. So this maybe is another way. He or she wants to know what happens to the old motors that are out of circulation. Maybe Quicks 99 wants to buy an old motor since the new ones obviously were expensive.
Yeah, the SB2s, which we ran through 2006 and part of 2007, and ran in the nationwide series really up through part of last year as well. A lot of those, we had about 150 of them roughly. And most of those had either been sold, or I think Mr. Hendrick has kept a few for engines that had won a particular race of note, or kept together with a car that'll be you know, on display in our museum. You know, there's a few things like that. There aren't really that many that are around, you know, anymore, because it's been long enough now they've gone. And our current engine, the R07, parts and pieces can be purchased through GM Performance, but it's not stuff that's readily available that you can, you know, easily buy off the shelf. It is available though. There's a lot of those, as well as our vendors that we work with. There were some good bargains out there for a while. A lot of power for a pretty reasonable
I assume not on
price.
eBay though.
No, I don't think we.
So I probably couldn't log on and get one.
No, probably not. No.
Well, you remember the person with the long name earlier, Mr. or Mrs. Long Name, who's torturing me with this MCLRNMERCJPM24. Thank you for making me read that. What they want to know: what areas of the motor can be tweaked for more power? I.e., how does one have 820 and some have 875? Because you were explaining the range earlier.
Kind of speaking in that respect, through the field, through all the different manufacturers, you know, and the different engine building shops. You know, for us specifically, we've got, you know, we feel with our consistency of manufacturing, procedures for assembly, and everything that we do throughout, you know, the engine building process and at the track as well, that, you know, we're in the neighborhood of like 0.25% variance from what we would consider best to worst. So we're starting to, you know, we're in the 2 horsepower range. Now we may build an engine for a particular track that may have, as a whole, may have a bit less horsepower, maximum horsepower, because we're trying to move that power into another area of the RPM range, or possibly trying to increase RPM capability, which, you know, that can sometimes, as you want to increase RPM, that may take away horsepower as well, because there's a trade-off that you'd have there for engine speed and durability. But, you know, in general, our engine packages on a week-to-week basis would be within 0.25%.
Wow. By the way, that person's name was Mark, I see here. So, Mark, thank you for your questions. Let's see. How about one from Doug Dukart, who you know quite well?
Yes, yes.
He wants to know, why does Alan Gustafson call you the Blade? Is that your nickname, the Blade? What's up with that?
Well, at least I thought it could be more dangerous than that. Well, you know, I'm the designated driver for our group at the racetrack, of which Doug is one. Ken Howes, Jeff Andrews, and my sidekick John Kendrash. So we, being the driver, sometimes you try to get out of the racetrack in a hurry, and Alan left the door open one time, and I filled it, and he was after me for about 5 miles trying to catch me.
Really?
He didn't know who it was.
Oh, okay. You just saw a gap and you just went for it.
Yeah. And finally he pulled up next to us there, and he's like, man, he wanted to get whoever was driving this car. He looks over, he's like, oh man, it's Max.
So no road rage from Alan?
No.
Well, Doug also wants to know, speaking of your driving, apparently he must not think much of your ability, because he says, what is the criteria for obtaining your driver's license from the state of Maine?
Yeah, I knew I was going to get dinged by Doug here quite a bit. It's I don't know. I'd like to know how I stacked up against Doug, but he's never driven. He's pretty good in the back seat though, giving you direction.
Yeah.
I'll tell you that.
Rycan wants to know, what do you do when the teams are racing?
During the race, I'd just be kind of walking up and down pit road. Got a
I guess at
radio.
that point it's kind of out of your hands.
You hope it is.
Yeah.
I mean, it's fortunately it's rare that we're mechanically have to do anything during the race. So basically, you headset on, radio communication. You're listening to what's and monitoring what's happening with all the teams. We can talk amongst ourselves because sometimes it's noisy on pit road. So we do have communication where we can talk amongst ourselves to understand, and maybe one car is running hot. Actually, 88, Dale Jr.'s car in Charlotte was running really hot, upwards of 300 degrees during the race. And you hear that on the radio communication between Junior and Lance.
Mm-hmm.
And Billy Davis, the engine tuner for the team, is listening as well, right? That's their primary focus, is just that, that radio communication. Whereas I'm kind of listening to it all. But anyway, understand and hear that, hey, we're running really hot. What's the problem? Do we have an engine problem? Was there damage to the front of the car because of contact? Is it possible we got some debris on the front of the grill that's shutting off airflow? And so, we communicate about things like that. Lance had Junior pit under green, which we didn't really want to do. We were about 20 laps out of our pit window. But we had to because we were running so hot. At that point in the race, it was like 125 laps into the race. It's a 400 lap race. We had over 300 miles still to go, and so Lance brought him down pit road. They did a 4-tire stop, got all the debris, which there was a lot of it. It was covering the grill, and those things that you're just trying to manage. Things during the race, everybody as the teams, and then if there are issues and cars are behind the wall, then we just all chip in, try to give a hand.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's say you do have an engine problem early in the weekend, which obviously you really want to avoid, but how many spare engines, Crazy 88s wants to know, are typically taking the track for each team? I mean, is there one that could say, for the 5 and the 88 that could go in either one if they need one, or how does that work?
Well, each week we bring a spare engine in each transporter that we have available for that team, as well as an engine in the spare car, which, depending on the particular track, it's hard to manage in this degree, spare car engines, because you could change them out every week, and hopefully you don't use the cars very often. So we may have an engine in the car that would be well suited for that particular track. We may have an engine on the truck that would be more suited for that particular track. So we'll have a game plan in mind before we ever leave that if we needed a spare car, we may roll it off the truck, and the car could very well, it would go on the racetrack, and they could make practice laps with it. But we may elect that it would be in our best interest, or from a performance and/or durability standpoint, to change that to a spare engine that we would have ready to go for that as well.
This is the last question we have time for, but you were just talking about the engines for, or the temperature for Dale Jr. at Charlotte got upwards of 300 degrees, you said. So MU Tiger is wondering, what is the maximum temperature for how hot can an engine run? How long can it sustain it before it blows?
Well, we haven't taken anything to the temperature degree to say that this is a definite failure. The 88 is a good example. In Charlotte, it was 300 degrees, and we got the debris off the grill and finished the race with no engine issues, and the engine came apart and looked to be in very good condition. That gives us some exposure, and to a certain degree we learn about our limitations in situations like that, because we certainly wouldn't push an engine to that level by choice. So generally speaking, ourselves as well as everybody in the field would be you're generally trying to run in the neighborhood of 200 to 230 degrees of water temperature during the course of the weekend or a race. And we have a level of comfort upwards of 240 to 260. The thing that'll play into it as well is that some tracks have a very the duty cycle, the time at full throttle is much harder on an engine than other tracks where maybe there's a lot less time at full throttle or more time at par throttle. So depending on some of those situations, those numbers would vary depending on what track you were at.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for coming, and I think we all learned probably a lot about engines today, which is good to know for watching the race in the future. I know for myself that'll help a lot. So thank you everybody for all the great questions, even Mark with a long name. Appreciate your questions. Be sure to come back next week, everybody. We're going to have pit crew coordinator Walt Smith here 12:30 next Wednesday, same time, same place. AmpUp88.com, where you guys come up to amp up for the race each week. Anything we should ask Walt? Do you have any ideas of anything we can get him on or anything like that?
Yeah, I don't. I didn't know. I'd need some time.
Okay.
I see him down at the gym quite a bit.
If you log on next week and try to zing him on some stuff like Doug got you today.
Yes. Okay. I'll try to find out a little bit for sure.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you for coming. Thank you guys for joining in. We'll see you next week.